These things cannot be done in a clandestine way, and therefore now, when there is no much necessity, it is the duty of all faithful ministers to be laying out themselves to the utmost in their pastoral function for the suppressing of all the evils of the time, notwithstanding of any prohibition to the contrary, in the most public manner, according to the example of all the faithful servants of the Lord, both in the Old and New Testaments. Though it be most impiously and tyrannically interdicted, yet the laws of God stand unrepealed, and therefore all who have a trumpet and a mouth should set the trumpet to their mouth, and sound a certain sound, not in secret, for that will not alarm the people, but in the most public manner they can have access to. It is the duty of all to come and hear and obey their warnings and witnessings, command who will to the contrary. It was for mockings, despisings his words, and misusing his prophets that the wrath of the Lord arose against his people, the Jews, until there was no remedy. 2 Chronicles 36, verse 16. Therefore, from all that is said, it must be concluded that meetings for gospel ordinances must be as public as can be, and if so, then that they should be in houses safety will not permit to us to go to the streets or marketplaces, neither safety nor prudence will admit. Therefore we must go to the fields with it, cost what it will. Number 4. Seeing then there must be meetings and public meetings, and seeing we cannot and dare not in conscience countenance the curates' meetings, we must here own, embrace, and follow such faithful ministers as are clothed with Christ's commission, righteousness, and salvation, and to keep the words of the Lord's patience, and the testimony of the Church of Scotland in particular. This, I think, will not or dare not be denied by any that own the authority of Christ, which none can deny or instruct the contrary, but our ministers that venture their lives in preaching in the fields have a certain seal to their ministry, and is sealed sensibly in the conviction of many and confession of more. That Christ's ministers and witnesses employed about the great gospel message, clothed with his authority, under the obligation of his commands lying upon them, must preach, and the people must hear them, notwithstanding of all laws to the contrary. Divines grant that the magistrate can no more suspend from the exercise than he can depose from the office of the ministry, for the one is a degree unto the other. See Apollon de Jure Magist Circa Sacra, Part 1, page 334, and Rutherford's Do Right of Presbyterians, page 430, etc. For whether it be right in the sight of God to hearken unto men more than unto God, the consciences of the greatest enemies may be appealed unto, Acts 4, verse 19. They must not cease, wherever they have a call and occasion, to teach and preach Jesus Christ, Acts 5, verse last verse. Necessity is laid upon them, yea, woe unto them if they preach not the gospel, 1 Corinthians 11, verse 16. In all things they must approve themselves as the ministers of God, in much patience, in afflictions and necessities, etc., by honor and dishonor, by evil report and good report, as deceivers and yet true, as unknown and yet well known. 2 Corinthians 6, verses 4, 8, and 9. They must preach the word, be instant in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long-suffering and doctrine. 2 Timothy 4, verse 2. Dare any say, then, that a magistrate's or tyrant's laws can exonerate a minister, or silence him by his own proper illicit acts as king or tyrant, or formally and immediately? Will mischiefs framed into a law warrant such iniquity, or an act of a king of clay rescind the mandates of the King of Kings, or exempt people from obedience due thereunto? Or will the bishops' canons, who have no power from Christ, or the censures of them that stand condemned themselves by the constitutions of the Church and acts of the general assemblies, have any weight in the case? And yet these are all that can be alleged, except odious and invidious calumnies, the ordinary lot of the most faithful against the present preachers in the fields, which are sufficiently confuted in their late informatory vindication, and need not here be touched. Seeing, therefore, they have given up themselves unto Christ as his servants, they must resolve to be employed for him to the utmost of their power, and must not think of laying up their talent in a napkin, especially now when there is so great necessity, when defection is yet growing, covered, countenanced more and more, division nothing abated, but new oil cast daily into the flames of devouring contentions, the people generally drowned in the deluge of the times, snares and sins, and like to be overwhelmed in the inundation of black popery, now coming in at the open sluice of this wicked toleration with the congratulations, of addressing ministers, when now the harvest is great and the laborers are few. Great then is the necessity, and double must be the woe that abideth such ministers, as are silent at such a time, and great and inexcusable is the sin of the people if they do not come out and countenance faithful ministers, the messengers of the Lord of hosts, from whom they should seek the law, Malachi 2, verse 7. Especially when there are so many that have so palpably betrayed their trust, and so few that are faithful in the necessary testimony of the day. Seeing then faithful ministers must preach, and people must hear, where can they meet with conveniency and safety and freedom, except either under the shelter of this wicked toleration, which they dare not do, or else go to the fields? Number 5. It must be obtained also that the ministers have a right to preach in this unfixed manner, wherever they have a call, their relation now, in this undisturbed state of the church, being to be considered more extensively than in its unsettled condition. For understanding which, we must distinguish a 3- or 4-fold relation that a minister of the gospel stands into. First, he is a minister of Christ and steward of the mysteries of God, 1 Corinthians 4, verse 1, having his commission from Christ as his master, and his relation he hath universally, wherever he is. Secondly, he is a minister of the Catholic Church, though not a Catholic minister of it, which is his primary relation, for that is the Church in which ministers are set, 1 Corinthians 12, verse 28, and to which they are given, Ephesians 4, verses 11 and 22. Thirdly, he is a minister of the particular church whereof he is a member, and so in Scotland a minister is a minister of the Church of Scotland, and is obliged to lay out himself for the good of that church. Fourthly, he is a minister of the particular congregation whereunto he hath a fixed relation in a constitute case of the church. This last is not essential to a minister of Christ, but is subservient to the former relation. But when separated from such a relation, or when it is impossible to be held, he is still a minister of Christ, and is called to preach the gospel, stands and binds. See Mr. Durham's digression on this particular, on Revelation chapter 2, page 89, etc., in quarto. For though he be not a Catholic officer having an equal relation to all churches, as the apostles were, nevertheless he may exercise ministerial acts authoritatively, upon occasions warrantably calling for the same, in other churches as heralds of one king, having authority to charge in his name wherever it be, especially in a broken state of the church, when all the restriction his ministerial relation is capable of is only a tie and call to officiate in the service of that church whereof he is a member, and so he hath right to preach everywhere, as he is called for the edification of that church. The reasons are, first, he hath a power from Christ, the master of the whole church, and therefore wherever the master's authority is acknowledged, the servant's ministerial authority cannot be denied, at least in relation to that church whereof he is a member as well as a minister. Number 2, he hath commission from Christ principally for the edification of Christ's body, as far as his ministry can reach according to the second relation. Thirdly, his relation to the whole church is principal, and that which is fixed to a part is only subordinate, because it is a part of whole. Number 4, his commission is indefinite to preach the gospel, which will suit as well in one place as in another. Number 5, the same great ends of the church's great good and edification which warrants fixing of a minister to a particular charge in the church's peaceable state. 6th, else it would follow that a faithful minister, standing in that relation to a disturbed and destroyed church, and all his gifts and graces were useless in that case, which, notwithstanding, are given for the good of the church. 7th, yea, by this, when his fixed relation cannot be kept, it would follow that he ceased to be a minister, and his commission expired, so that he should stand in no other relation to Christ than any private person so qualified, which were absurd. For by commission he is absolutely set apart for the work of the ministry, so long as Christ hath work for him, if he continue faithful. 8th, this hath been the practice of all the propagators of the gospel from the beginning, and of our reformers in particular, without which they could never have propagated it so far. And it was never accounted the characteristic of apostles to preach unfixedly, because in times of persecution pastors and doctors also might have preached wherever they came, as the officers of the church of Jerusalem did, when scattered upon the persecution of Stephen, Acts 8, verse 1, did go everywhere preaching the word, verse 4. Since therefore they may and must preach in this unfixed manner, they must in this broken state look upon all the godly in the nation, that will own and hear them, to be their congregation, and embrace them all, and consult their conveniency and universal advantage in such a way as all equally may be admitted, and none excluded from the benefit of their ministry. And therefore they must go to the fields with it. 6th, The Lord hath so signally owned, successfully countenanced, and singularly sealed field preaching in these unfixed exercises, that both ministers and people have been much encouraged against all opposition to prosecute them, as having experienced much of the Lord's power and presence in them, and of the breathings of the enlivening, enlarging, enlightening, and strengthening influences of the Spirit of God upon them. The people are hereby called in this case of defection to seek after these waters that they have been so often refreshed by. For in this case of defection, God being pleased to seal with a palpable blessing on their souls the word from ministers adhering to their principles, they may safely look on this as a call from God to hear them and follow after them so owned of the Lord. And it being beyond all doubt that the assemblies of the Lord's people, to partake of pure ordinances with full freedom of conscience in the fields, hath been signally owned and blessed of the Lord, and hath proven a mean to spread the knowledge of God beyond anything that appeared in our best times. And in despite of this signal appearance of God, and envy at the good done in these meetings, all endeavors being used by wicked men to suppress utterly all these rendezvous of the Lord's militia, both by open force and cunning Midianitish wiles, ministers cannot but look upon it as their duty, and that the Lord hath been preaching from heaven to all who would hear and understand it, that this way of preaching, even this way, was that wherein his soul took pleasure, and to which he hath been and is called all who would be co-workers with him this day, to help forward the interest of his crown and kingdom. Many hundreds of persecuted people can witness this, and all the martyrs have sealed it with their blood, and remembered it particularly on the scaffolds, that they found the Lord there, and that he did lead them thither, where he had made them to ride upon the high places of the earth, and to eat the increase of the fields, and to suck honey out of the rock, and that in their experience under the Spirit's pouring out from on high, they found the wilderness to be a fruitful field, and in their esteem their feet were beautiful upon the mountains that brought forth good tidings, that published peace, that brought good tidings of good, that published salvation, that said unto Zion, Thy God reigneth. And all the ministers that followed this way, while they were faithful, and had but little strength, and kept his word, and did not deny his name, found that verified in their experience which was said of Philadelphia in Revelation 3 verse 8, that they had an open door which no man could shut, the characters whereof, as they are expounded by Mr. Durham, were all verified in these meetings, where, number 1, the ministers had a door of utterance upon the one side open to them, and the people's ears were open to welcome the same in love to edification, simplicity, and diligence on the other. Second, this had real changes following, many being made humble, serious, tender, fruitful, etc. Third, the devil raged and set himself to oppose, traduce, and some way to blast the ministry of the most faithful more than any others. Just as when Paul had a greater door and effectual open to him, there were many adversaries. 1 Corinthians 16 verses 9. Fourth, yet the Lord hath been observedly defeating the devil and profanity in every place where the gospel came, and made him fall like lightning from heaven by the preaching of the word. Fifth, and the most experimental proof of all was, that hereby ground was gained upon the kingdom of the devil, and many prisoners brought off to Jesus Christ. And therefore, seeing it is so, this must certainly be a call to them who are yet laboring in that work which others have left off, to endeavor to keep this door open with all diligence, and reap the corn while it is ripe, and when the sun shines make hay, and with all watchfulness, lest the wicked one sow his tares, if they should fall remiss.